see so many faces of friends and colleagues we have met over the last years join us today for this book symposium. For us, it's a very special moment. This is a book that wasn't so easy to make. It spanned a couple of years through the pandemic. The project went through different phases, through very challenging times. Many of the authors, we are 18 authors in the book, so as you can imagine, many experienced having to move from university to different positions, to different countries. Some people lost loved ones, and then the project had ups and downs, but fortunately we are a team of 3 editors, and this was a very good idea because each of us was able to push the project in different moments that were challenging for the other ones. I want to first express my gratitude to all the authors who decided to stick with us through this project through all this time. I think the project is really worthwhile because we're looking at one of those very old questions for citizenship studies and for migration research, which is precisely examining the nexus, the supposed linkages between migrant integration and whether that counts towards citizenship, and then what kind of citizenship are we talking about? Do we only refer to naturalization, that is the formal acquisition of citizenship understood as nationality, or do we also perceive citizenship to be something else than nationality, something related to identity and to practices? And so our volume manages to throw a very fresh look to this very old question for our disciplines, and I think we have made an interesting contribution. I want to express my gratitude to the ECPR Migration and Ethnicity standing group. Daniela just mentioned the names of all the conveners, but Verena, Daniela, Roberta, Sebastián, Nawal, thank you very much for hosting this book symposium. And now I want to give the floor to another of the 3 editors. We have one of the editors is acting today rather as an author. Sara Wallace Goodman contributed a marvelous article to the volume, so she will have plenty of space to speak about that. But I want to give us a special time and space to Roxana Barbulescu, who was the initiator of this very big project. So she was the person who had the initial spark to restate this question and to gather a very diverse group of scholars in order to throw these fresh perspectives and fresh looks at the citizenship and integration nexus. So Roxana, now the floor is yours to tell us a little bit how the book is built, but not only that, please share with the world what were the motivations that you had, because these were new motivations connected to current events or to recent events, especially in Europe, that prompted you to restate these questions to the scholarly community. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Luicy. And I want to start by as well thanking the Standing Committee for the very excellent organization, despite the troubles to find the link. It's been wonderful to have this forum to have a discussion really with the authors, but also with the wider public around the things that were kind of living in our heads, but we wanted to bring a bit further. So this book really started as from the need to relook to the new agenda and bring a bit closer. They are close. We don't claim to reinvent the wheel, but to bring a bit closer and fresh looks on integration and citizenship and bring these 2 agendas to question them explicitly as the nexus that they create. And we've also adjectivized, we've localized the research in Europe. And this was something that we came to rather late in the project. And I think it was Sara that brought it, let's focus on Europe and kind of think about the scaling of these findings and this conversation to a particular space, because I think that there are other ongoing inquiries and exercises to look at citizenship and integration and belonging more globally. We wanted actually to limit and contain this to Europe because it has something interesting still. It has good theoretical value, we think, because it brings up it joins up new debate. Europe is still a very interesting place, and there's been new events, even a crisis after crisis, that brought some people to speak about perma-crisis, of austerity, the rise of the far right, in the UK, Brexit, but also that has an impact in the wider European space. And we thought that it deserves a new look, particularly as we are faced with a new narrative around membership, citizenship. States are rewriting even their vocabularies of how we discuss citizenship and belonging. There's a stronger emphasis on asylum, particularly as it was a few years ago. Migration is twisting, and then they are becoming fused further and further, these categories. So we wanted to invite a series of fantastic scholars who knew that have the boots on the field, and they were doing current research in these topics. And really, the edited book was an opportunity to open a new forum, because there is fantastic research being published as articles, as books, even podcasts, blogs. But we wanted to open a forum where we could engage in a conversation and kind of with the others, and in the company of these three editors, that we had different researches, but also common understanding of what we are talking about is when we refer to integration and citizenship. It was really easy to build up on the literature, but we have also different agendas when it comes to our common work. But we wanted really to open up a new forum, because it's very rarely that we have this sort of format and forums. It's really special issues and edited books where you can bring a group of scholars to kind of have a common conversation about current events, and to really test us on what is the new vocabulary, where should this sit today, how should we organize and think about this aspect. We started with a wider team, and I'm happy to say that it made it in March. So the book was published in March in this format, which is still a fantastic one. And we've survived the pandemic and pushed this project through the pandemic. I also want to say thanks to the transnationalism group in IMISCO, because they funded and helped us bring this collection and this volume as open access, which is really supportive. And yeah, I will give that word and to Lucy and to Daniela, because it's really quite important today when we talk about knowledge and producing knowledge, and particularly pushing through this new conversation to publish and make research available more widely. I think this was absolutely key. And finally, it seemed really important to us to look at the new research going on and various projects across various countries, and bring this together under this umbrella. Also because we are seeing now the fourth generation of migrants and refugees and citizens reaching adulthood. And we thought that they are seeing things, or those with boots on in the field, they are seeing things, new things, potentially. And they're responding to the new narratives in their own ways. And it is really only in the space of edited books and special issue where you have a lot more methodological pluralism, and you can showcase and make space while you're looking at the same topics, but you're doing so with different methodologies. So that was also important to bring this together. And the volume, we tried to bring a balanced team of authors and contributors. It is a gender balanced volume. and we'll try to bring emerging scholars. So we have one PhD student, but also with very established scholars. We've also managed to withstand accusation from the editors of constantly mixing British English and American English. But I think we've fought that battle as an international group. And yeah, these were my main points that I wanted to introduce today. Sara, do you want to say something at the beginning? Okay.
Let me just quickly thank both of you. It was a real team effort, and to thank the authors and to thank everyone here. I think this is such an exciting kind of discussion to have in this format. I mean, I regret that this was entirely done during the pandemic, but this really kind of enables, you know, really anyone to chime in to access the work, not just an open access format, but this format here that we can kind of all, I see, you know, tons of names and you guys all work on these issues. So, you know, while we are sort of here today presenting kind of some of the accumulated work from the volume, we really look forward to hearing your contributions and insights on the question as well. So thank you for coming today.
Yes, finally, I don't want to withhold the bigger discussion with the authors any further, just add two very small details. One, we have to thank the standing group on citizenship, migration, and political participation at IMISCO, because they funded the publication of this book as open access and really allow us to reach a much wider audience. So thanks for that. Another small but to me very important detail is that while the title of this book has Europe in it, I want to say that it's a pretty diverse look at Europe. If you flip through the book and look at the different chapters, one of my favorites is Alin and Bogdan's chapter that revises also how migrants from Western Europe arrive in Romania and what are their integration needs and their own appreciation of what they need to prove in Romanian society in order to become citizens. And this really flips our understanding of the citizenship and integration nexus and lets us think about similar processes in other regions of the world. And to me, it lets me dream of a similar volume in the future to come that also explores the citizenship and integration nexus in other very different latitudes. And having said that, I would like to pass the word to Tiziana Caponio. We would have loved to have Tiziana as author in the volume, but now we have her as a moderator of this book symposium, and we're very, very grateful for her participation in this role. So the floor is yours, Tiziana.
Thank you very much, Luicy, Roxana, Verena. Thank you, Sara, for inviting me, thinking of me for this book discussion. I think that this book is extremely important in the current context. And in particular, you know, citizenship has been one of those issues that currently are quite marginalized in the political agenda. We see all sorts of issues regarding crises, of course, and precarity, temporariness, security. We need to go back and maybe to look forward, that go back to citizenship as we used to do as scholars before the asylum crisis, but we need especially, you know, more general. Yeah, so I think it's very important to look beyond all what we are, you know, all the circumstances we are facing today. The history of migration teaches us very simply that migrants find their way through in many different contexts. And then the nexus, the citizenship integration nexus, is certainly crucial to our understanding of migration beyond the specific context of, you know, the current crisis or how we want to call that. I'm very happy to moderate this. I think this book discussion, because I think this is a timely important contribution, invites all of us to look at the years to come and, you know, to really focus on what our society will look like in maybe 50 years or more. And we need to get back to really question the link between citizenship and integration today. So without further say, would like to, you know, invite in particular, first of all, Floris Peters. I think his contribution to this book is very relevant in addressing the core issues and the core questions of the book regarding the nexus between naturalization as a juridical process, so the acquisition of citizenship on the one hand and the integration. Floris, if you can tell us a bit more on your contribution and also, you know, on all the chapters that in this book address this link and, you know, how you think from the contribution to the book we can reframe this link between citizenship as a juridical process and integration as a social process in the overall receiving societies. 8 minutes, I would say. Hi, Floris, I can see you.
Thanks so much.
Okay.
So my chapter was part of the first part of the book on indeed integration through citizenship. 3 chapters in that part, and so this is actually a big question, you know, whether citizenship actually matters for integration outcomes, and if so, for whom, and also under which conditions. It really matters actually what the requirements for naturalization are for the outcomes that we might expect. And so it is no surprise, I think, that all the chapters in this part of the book focus on these various requirements, and especially in the European context, there's tons of variation in this regard. So in my own chapter with colleagues Martin Vink and Swantje Valke, we focus on fees. That's actually the case in the 4th chapter by Marina and Madeleine as well. But also, for instance, civic or linguistic tests are mentioned in this regard. Also procedures, so not necessarily only the requirements on the books, but also those in practice, right? So that can include discretionary power by civil servants to interpret the requirements. That's something that comes to the fore, especially in the chapter by Djordje, chapter 2. So there are these various requirements for naturalization, and they matter for the extent to which integration can be facilitated through citizenship, because the idea here is that naturalization can be the crown jewel of the integration process. So the idea there is that first migrants invest in their own integration, and then they deserve to become a citizen after that process is completed. But an alternative way of looking at it is to see naturalization rather as a stepping stone for integration, right? So through the process of becoming a citizen, integration is facilitated. So then it's more of a catalyst. And so then I think these chapters really contribute to that debate by showing what the various requirements for naturalization can be in different countries, but how that affects immigrants' propensity and their ability to naturalize and thus enjoy a potential citizenship premium, as it is often called. So this effect that citizenship might have for integration outcomes. And so we see then that there are major differences in the ways that requirements matter. So fees, for example, perhaps unsurprisingly, make a bigger difference for those with limited financial means, for example. Whereas, for example, renunciation requirements are much more important for migrants from more developed countries of origin, whose original citizenship is relatively valuable, and so they are more reluctant to give it up in the naturalization process. And so these requirements can tell us who is able to and is likely to naturalize, and thus also informs us as to who might benefit from becoming a citizen for integration outcomes. And so it's, of course, a tough challenge to capture exactly what the integration outcomes of naturalization are because of the selective nature of the naturalization process. Who naturalizes or not is not random. But the first step has to be to look at the process by which migrants become citizens, and therefore who actually gets to navigate these requirements and is thus able to potentially enjoy the rewards that naturalization could bring. And so this part of the book, I think, really contributes to that story.
Thank you very much, Peter. I think you're, you give a snapshot on a key issue. So requirements matter and are, selecting who is going to benefit from the citizenship premium. It's not that natural that everyone will do. I mean, and so it is important to understand which are the conditions and what can enable the access to citizenship, and then also what are the hurdles in this process. So linking to that, I think the contribution of Djordje, you already mentioned that, the procedure and what is going on at the administrative level, which is a bit probably still understudied from my point of view. It's very important to understand. And so I would invite Djordje to elaborate more on this, his chapter, considering his chapter, and also maybe other chapters that bring to the fore the issue of the local level in citizenship, procedure and access to naturalization. Don't know, Djordje, if I can see you. I can see you actually.
Thank you very much, Tiziana. So to answer, yeah, indeed, the dimension of the procedure is still understudied. We're making some headway. There are a number of studies here and there that are coming up. There are also a few special issues in the works about this. But specifically, the sense of my chapter in this book is the idea that policy on the books and the policy in practice might not only, as it's quite natural, differ in outcomes, but they might even differ in general philosophies. So, for example, while we have seen that most European countries now have a clear integrationist approach to citizenship, so they require people to integrate in order to become citizens, it's not a given that the officers who apply the law care about the integration of the citizens. And in particular, I compare Belgium and the UK, and I show how in the UK, even if the law and the reform was explicitly about requiring integration, the officers who decide on naturalization do not really have an interest in checking whether a person is integrated. Essentially because there was, so to say, an overlooking on the lawmakers' part in giving those officers actually a duty to check for integration. So one thing that I found is, firstly, that we were, when interviewing directors of the service that then deals with naturalization, we were flat out said, no, it's not something that we are really interested in. It's not something that we are asked to do, to check if people are integrated when they ask for citizenship. There are formalized tests. We have to see that they fulfill the formal requirements. We might be more interested about detecting fraud, but nobody asked us, and we do not do it on our own, check if someone is integrated before deciding on a citizenship application. Now, the terms of discretion and of the local level, we have some evidence that whenever the naturalization process is decentralized, perhaps not so much discretion, but variation in the outcomes is almost inevitable. So the UK has a centralized system. All decisions are taken in Liverpool. more or less, even if it's a highly discretionary system, there are consistent outcomes in terms of what conditions you get citizenship or not. I show that in the chapter and elsewhere that in Belgium, even if it's a low discretion system, the fact that the decision is not taken in a central office, but it's decentralized on the territory means that what counts as requirements changes from place to place. And we have similar evidence for France, for Germany, and especially for Switzerland. So in every case in which there's no single centralized office taking decisions, your chances of getting citizenship or not changes a lot depending on where you live and what local office will take your application and consider it. I have to say, and this is also interesting, in most cases, it's not the local authorities who have an influence. Local authorities try often to do a lot in immigration and citizenship, but they do not really have powers, except perhaps in Switzerland, to a degree in Germany, but even there, even if it's a federal procedure, it's not that strong. Who actually seems to have the power of changing the outcomes are the local branches of the federal or of the national institutions. So, for example, in Belgium, which is a federal country, it's more the local offices of the Federal Ministry of Justice who take the decision and who actually apply different interpretations, rather than the different communities and the regions trying to play a real role in naturalization as itself. Now, obviously, there's another part which is not about the outcomes, but about the interest of people to naturalize. And for example, a chapter by Fernandez and Samson shows how in the UK, even after Brexit, EU citizens naturalize at a far lower rates than non-EU citizens. So even after the interest in naturalizing after Brexit. But there's a certain element in, so to say, belonging, and also in what kind of relation you have with the state broadly intended, including their local authorities. So for example, Nando and Marie show in their chapter how London has, to a certain degree, moderated the sense of rejection linked to Brexit for EU citizens. We have other chapters. So, for example, Zapata, Barreiro, and Helgen show how the sense of belonging can be understood at the neighborhood level. Voicu and Kreuter have shown how Bucharest in itself has a separate sense of belonging when compared to the rest of Romania. So there are a number of issues, and obviously Verena's chapter on local nationalist parties shows that they do have a specific policies about immigration that they try to promote, even if they do not always have the power or the means to actually impact on integration procedures broadly intended. So obviously, there could be well the case that even if local authorities do not have power to influence the outcomes of naturalization procedures, they might make people more or less willing to naturalize, both because they feel national and because they might have an interest in staying in a place which is more welcoming bureaucratically and or avoiding some bureaucratic pressure. For my data, I haven't, however, found clear evidence that people naturalize because they feel more welcome in the place they are. So even in the Brexit context, I haven't found people in London or in Scotland who are clearly feeling more welcome than elsewhere, saying, well, I will naturalize because of this. Because people might naturalize out of feeling included, or they might naturalize out of fear and out of the desire to avoid bureaucratic barriers and basically to avoid migration controls. So I also wonder if Nando, because I know he has data specifically on this, if he has found something more about the intention to naturalize as being clearly linked to the local place in which you are and the degree to which local authorities might influence this. Because my result would be, yes, people feel much more welcome in certain areas in the UK than the others, but this does not really translate in different naturalization intentions. It's more about perhaps staying or leaving, or more often moving to another part of the country that is seen as more welcome, but not so much in naturalization itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Djordje. I think that, this perspective from, the street level bureaucracy and the local level is very important. But yeah, what you were mentioning, the link with belonging to a place is still a bit foggy. So we need to really, a deep digger on the dig deeper on, does it really matter to be in a friendly place, or rather there can be all sorts of reasons for naturalizing, for going in through the naturalization procedure, and the local level in that respect is not that relevant. So I would continue this conversation with Nando. I think that can give us the perspective more on the group side, on the migrants themselves, in particular the chapter from Nando regards the specific group, that of Roma in London. So this is, I think, an important perspective that often, again, might need more attention from scholars, that of the migrants who are going through the process. So, Nando, I would invite you to maybe tell us something more on the lived experiences of citizenship from a group perspective, and also, to what extent, I think, as Djordje was mentioning, being or feeling to be part of a local community can eventually influence, in some respects, the propensity to apply for naturalization. If you have any, thought on this. So, please, Nando, the floor.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to join the panel, and it's really a fantastic book, and it really helps everyone to sort of open up questions around this nexus. One of the things that stems to mind for us, Floris said before, and also Djordje, is this idea of the relationships, obviously, between naturalization and integration. The chapter that Marie Godin and myself wrote for the book is draws on a project called Euro Children that we carried out with EU families and their children in Britain in the post-Brexit referendum. The project was very much covering all the nations of the United Kingdom, but for the purpose of the chapter, we only analyzed the interviews that we carried out with London-based European families. As part of the research, we have published around the narratives of naturalizations among those who were embracing sort of the process of naturalization. And from our perspective, and the report which we wrote before the article itself was called Naturalization and Disintegration, and with this in inverted commas. So this idea that very much, also echoing some of the things which Djordje said, in the context of Brexit and the disruption that was produced by Brexit, the process of naturalization became really sort of a defensive and a protective mechanism. I wrote to either reproduce the condition that people were experiencing before Brexit in terms of protection of rights, to some extent freedom of movement, but also as a way of avoid to be co-opted within the range of the immigration control. So to escape the hostile environment, to try to avoid the process that really Brexit represented, which is the relabeling of people from EU citizen to EU migrants to migrants. So this is the 3 stages we went through. With the so-called EU settlement scheme, the EU citizen became EU migrants, and they were received some forms of protection and rights. But then after the implementation of Brexit, the EU migrants are just migrants. They are just treated under the sort of the terms of the mainstream immigration system. And in a way, this was a way of avoiding or escaping or protecting families and children in this process. In the chapter, more specifically, we carried out 60 interviews with EU families in London, and then the project had over 135 families all over the country. Partly, the sampling was based on our analysis of 4 decades of census, so is trying to represent as much as possible the different sort of components that of the EU population in the different parts of the country. As part of this process, we also produced 15 video documentaries with 15 families, which I'll circulate the link in a second. It's like 2-minute short films, which you can see the people talking about their experience, where you see family portraits carried out by professional photographers. What we have to see on one end, and now the chapter fits in the project and the book. In a sense, it's at the border between 2 different parts, from the integration from below, because very much we look at London as an example of urban citizenship and the sense of attachment, and now location enabled people to develop strategies of coping with Brexit, disruptive Brexit. But also the argument we try to make is that this the specific condition of London also enabled the production of a different idea of what EU citizenship is. So in a sense, it's at the same time a citizenship from below, but also citizenship from above, skipping the national forms of identification. And this is where the title sits. In London, I feel I'm European. It's actually try to capture that London is a space that become an enabling for developing idea of citizenship, which are more inclusive, more progressive to some extent. And what we try to do, we use an intersectional and situated approach. So looking at how London was constructed in a narrative about Brexit and the politics of emotion that Brexit represented, try to understand what it meant to people in many ways, but also to try to understand what kind of EU families were produced by London, which is the other dimension here. So what we found particularly interesting was that while, and this is echo to some of the points that we made before, while people were saying, yes, life in London is better, London was, I think, in the top 50 places where there was a stronger support for Remain in all country, about 40 were in London. So this is the place where the support for Remain was stronger. So people really confirmed this sense of feeling at home, feel protected, feeling Londoners, because they felt they can talk to their neighbors without feeling they were no longer welcome in the country and things like that. But it's also what was interesting is how people were saying in the context of what Brexit is represented, all this not just relabeling, but also rebordering in terms of, and people very often recounted the experience of encountering the border at the airport, but also encountering the border on the place of work, being asked to produce, even if you have lived for 20 years in the country, being asked to prove that your right to work and bring it, to document it. It was presented as something that was really sort of unsettling in many ways. So London represented a kind of a place of protection, but also represent a place where, and this is connected with some of the work that also Vertovec did around super diversity, and this idea that also became the enabler of some forms of EU citizenship or also of relationship that were felt as not possible in other places in the country, but also in Europe. So a lot of people told us in London is the best place to raise mixed race, for example, children. And we interviewed a number of mixed nationality and also mixed race couples that were basically repeating the same thing. Diversity is the normal within London. It's invisible, and basically it's the next generation are going to become even more diverse. So despite everything going on, this is the best. Going back to they also interviewed a number of Roma families. In particular, one of them, you can also see the video, the short video. And here was interesting to understand the politics of emotion around Brexit and how they were positioning this idea of where do I settle and why. And looking at how the impact of Brexit and understanding what they meant to them was also related very much, not just at the present, but also the past. So a Roma person from Romania told me, well, despite everything, this is still the best place for a Roma to live. And also related to what was the story that were coming about the treatment of Roma in the present in other cities in Europe. So I think, what the point I think we try to make then is that it becomes sort of the super diversity, which has nothing to do with, in a sense, with the freedom of movement, but became a place, it creates the condition where specific forms of new or Europeanness can be developed. And what we found also very interesting, and this is something we have written also elsewhere, is this idea that now, despite Brexit, despite the fact that the UK are outside the European Union now, London is by far the largest conglomerate of EU nationals in Europe. You know, with even 4 times more EU national, non-native EU national than Brussels, for example. So what that represents in terms of a cultural hub as a capacity to transform and produce idea of Europeanness is really fundamental. Thank you.
Thank you, Nando. Very interesting perspective. So we have seen, you know, different facets, I see, of the citizenship integration nexus. So starting from the requirements, the laws, then through the local bureaucracies, national and local bureaucracies, and now on the lived experiences of groups in London, which seems to be far more kind of European capital still struggling to be. And so I think we go nicely to the final contribution today from Sara Goodman regarding precisely EU citizenship, which is certainly an institution we have been, living with for quite a long time now, but certainly we need to understand, and I think your contribution, Sara, helps us to understand better what does it really mean to be a EU citizen, and how does this helps or somehow supports integration beyond, can support integration beyond the national level and national citizenship. So Sara, I would invite you, I think in continuity with what somehow already Nando was mentioning, what is the EU citizenship as a lived experience, and also, what kind of new belonging this produces, but also the inequalities that inevitably it implies. So Sara, the floor is yours. I see your slide.
Thank you. Great. Everyone can see and hear okay? Great. So thank you for that question, because you sort of precisely nailed the tension and the thing that I was looking for, right? So, we had this discussion as editors, like, well, do we need to write a conclusion? How do we sort of think about kind of the totality of integration through citizenship? And, the first part, looked at integration through citizenship. The second part of the book looks at integration beneath citizenship. So some of the rich subnational city level work that we see. And then sort of the third part was, as we, have been kind of moving towards, is like integration above citizenship. So what is happening at the supranational level? Does that constitute integration? Who experiences it? Under what conditions? And so, I kind of approached the question and thinking about, well, like, what has been achieved through EU citizenship? What can it do? What is it a mechanism for? And so this chapter was very much a reflection. It's not, it's an assessment. It's not an argument. So I kind of wanted to take it as is, look at kind of the institutional history of what was built, how it looks today, and sort of what that tool can or cannot do. And so, I mean, no spoilers, I sort of set myself up for failure here in that I ask a bit of a straw man, though the question mark indicates that, it is a real limited tool for integration. It's integration for some, and I encourage you guys to look at some of the other chapters in part 3 that I'll talk about in a second, that we kind of really see the value of an EU citizenship in the kind of the absence or the threat of losing that sort of status and mobility, but that through sort of its own process of development, it has become a very limited tool for accomplishing some of the things that we may expect a citizenship to do based on kind of our current understanding of it. So, just to clarify, when I ask if it's a tool for integration, what I'm looking at is political integration, right? Just as both as a kind of a low bar, like, if assigning status does not achieve political integration, it's not going to achieve other types of integration. So in that sense, it's a low bar, but it's also like a high bar because we're talking about this real derivative status and whether it can of state citizenship. And so whether it can do anything is a pretty high bar. You know, I thought I'd give your eyes a bit of a break from our faces. So I thought, oh, I'll include some pictures in my slideshow. And like, I always come back to the Danish example from early days of coronavirus. This is like March, you know, single digits 2020, right? And they said like, we're going to suspend handshakes. So no naturalizations will take place in Denmark, which like, because of the handshake requirement, which was like adopted like in 2018, right? That like, there will no naturalizations be happening because of COVID, or and then we call it coronavirus, right? You couldn't do that. So I was thinking like, wow, this is like, it's such a high bar to expect EU citizenship to really do anything when this is what the national conditions are looking like at any given time. So, you know, we're really talking about political integration, like assigning status, as opposed to kind of social or cultural outcomes. So like, general question, like what happens when you give people status? What happens when you give them the security of status that comes with citizenship, national, supranational, whatever, right? So we know it does like a lot of good things. Floris already mentioned some of these, you know, outcomes, right? It can achieve political efficacy, participation, communal activities, cultural attachment. Sometimes, I mean, these are sort of all some of the downstream effects that can come from political integration. And so this is also the high-low bar is like, you know, political integration is sufficient outcome of EU citizenship, but like that any of these would be produced from EU citizenship is like wildly aspirational. You know, one of the things I think we ask today that is really new for thinking about the citizenship nexus, integration nexus is like, do you need citizenship to give rights though? Like this, I don't think was a really prevalent part of this conversation a few decades ago. And now we have like just abundant research, like non-citizen voting, Hannah Larian, migrant voting, Vicky Finn, like all this work that shows that like, well, like where is the place of citizenship in the rights next, you know, to begin with? So, you know, there's just lots of variation when it comes to non-citizen suffrage at this point that, you know, a real critical re-examining of the citizenship integration nexus has to involve those policies and actors as well. And that's something that was really bypassed when we look at the supranational level, I think, in terms of like who is empowered and who is neglected, which I'll talk about in a second. So when I say that EU citizenship is aspirational, here's another fun game for the eye. Like, I think that some people probably envision EU citizenship to look something like this, but like these are sort of the real inflection points of crisis, as opposed to sort of the mundane everyday politics of the EU and EU citizenship in particular. I don't know if this is what bureaucrats imagined in the 70s, but it certainly did not evolve to something like this as sort of an everyday practice, right? So we know EU citizenship is a status derivative of state citizenship. It has been described as both banal and kitsch. And what I do in the chapter is I really trace how that happened. You know, by design, it was always meant to be residual and reflective of state decisions. But what has happened through sort of in taking an institutional approach at studying EU citizenship is we see three outcomes, which I present in the chapter, that EU citizenship today is incomplete. So it never consolidated to being this meaningful social rights status that it was initially intended to be. And this is sort of like the inflection point here is Maastricht, right? Of course, goals can change, institutions can change, drift, whatever, but like it wasn't what it was designed to be or what it was intended to be. So in addition to being incomplete, it's also imbalanced. So we see different rights for voting at both the local and supranational level for second country nationals. So you know, if we think about citizenship as, you know, just sort of a status conveying equal right, you know, rights to an equal, you know, equal members of a political community, it is imbalanced. And then it's also inconsistent in how we see local voting rights for second versus third country nationals. So I just sort of look at these different kind of outcomes and just kind of evaluate them from an institutional perspective and see that there's some, you know, inherent weaknesses to the structure of EU citizenship today. Then what I do is I look at some of the political consequences that result from that incomplete imbalanced structure. So I look at enlargement, how we think again about citizens as workers. So this is sort of the 1970s updated to thinking about, so we've come full circle in a sense without the institutional updating to support that. We see mixed member preferences. So as enlargement has taken place, we see new interests disrupt the sort of equilibrium that existed in terms of the consensus around what EU citizenship is supposed to do. So the second political consequence is kind of how people obtain citizenship within the member states is not harmonized at the EU level. So we have these issues of like investment citizenship, inheritance citizenship that makes the conveying of EU citizenship uneven at the supranational level. And then Brexit. And like this, of course, is a you know, people talk about this Frank Sinatra test, but I like to call it the Joni Mitchell rule, that you don't always seem to go, you don't know what you got till it's gone, right? And so when you remove EU citizenship and the rights that come with it, suddenly, right, it's sort of the value of EU citizenship comes into full relief. And, you know, just to highlight some of the other chapters from this section is, you know, they're really discussing like, well, what does EU citizenship mean now that, like, you know, the threat of it is tangible. And so when I said this is like an assessment, not an argument, we really see today that the EU citizenship is not the panacea that it may have been desired to be in the 1970s. You know, that's okay. But also, like, the problem is different today. So when we think about what the democratic deficit was like in the 1990s, right, when they sort of, when the ambition was sort of like fully thwarted to EU citizenship, even this consolidation of social rights, like the problem today is not participation and representation. The democratic problem today is really, you know, systemic. It's Poland and Hungary. It's, you know, undermining the rule of law. And so it's a different democratic problem, which may not, and the institutional solution for that, it's not necessarily a robust EU citizenship. There's also sort of different frontiers today, right? That I think when we think about the citizenship integration nexus, you know, a lot of it is happening externally, right? You see the total redirection of migration to the external, to third-party sites. I think I saw Hannah in this call, and Hannah's great work on integrating immigration with naturalization. So like a lot of this stuff is happening externally and linked to immigration directly. And then a lot of it is happening at the subnational level. So, you know, the part 2 of the book, I see Christina's here and her great work in regional studies on, you know, integration at the subnational level. I didn't know if Anita is here as well, but, you know, so there's this great work out there that's really looking at the different levels of what integration is happening. So, you know, like, it's okay that it's not happening at the supranational level, but like it should focus our attention to kind of these different frontiers where like meaningful change is happening, and it's also not necessarily at the nation state level, at, you know, the national level either. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sara, for this contribution on EU citizenship, which I found very important. It is time for an assessment, you know, since the 1990s, and I think this is most timely, especially in the light of Brexit, as we've seen, has, you know, changed the perception of EU citizenship, and we will see what comes next. But hopefully Brexit seems, you know, to keep some of the issues behind a bit more, you know, these populist groups a bit more silent on that. But it is clear that, you know, it is a challenge to make EU citizenship become something which is really experienced by the people, the migrants, beyond what is on the book today.